You're like, thank you. Okay, welcome back. We are joined by Joel Perigo is how you correctly pronounce it. From the Municipal Assistance, he's the Municipal Assistance Program Manager from AOT, and he's going to follow up on the discussion that we had last week. And take it away, Joel.
Sure. Yeah. So as we talked about last week, when I presented the Show Me the Money guide, some of the programs that are within there come through municipal assistance, but not all of them. So what I put together here is sort of a breakdown of each of the programs that comes through my section and what we've seen over the last few years for applications received, what we've awarded, sort of a dollar representation of those same applications and percentages to give you a sense of where we're at. I'm not going to go down through every single number here, obviously, but I'll just kind of run down what each of these means. Starting at the top of the Bike Ped grant program. We do that on an annual solicitation basis. Typically, we announce it in the spring and make awards in the late summer timeframe. And so you'll see we have 6 fiscal years represented here. The first bunch of numbers and figures is for what we call large scale, which is just design and construction, new design and construction projects coming into the Bike Ped program. So, in these years, we received this many applications for that type of project. We awarded this many, which represented this much percentage, and then the dollar percentage over here. The second group is additional funding for large scale. So if we had an existing grant within the program and we are adding some additional funding into that existing project, that's what this is, this section here. And then the next one is a group for scoping. And as I mentioned, we try to fund all of our scoping applications. They make for better projects moving forward, gets the towns headed in the right direction to understand, we want to put a sidewalk from point A to point B. How are they going to get there? And what should that look like? Makes for a better application when they come in for design and construction funding later on.
It's like a preliminary engineering. Yeah.
It's not even to that level. It's what we refer to as a preferred alternative. It's pre sort of engineering, really. You end up with a very conceptual layout and a conceptual estimate and identify, resources that you may impact, utility impacts, those sorts of things. And then the next one in the Bike Ped part is the small scale, which are state funded grants. Those we fund at a 50% share. There's no engineering involved, so it's made to be a sort of quick and dirty fix. Like I mentioned last time, like a gap project. I know the town of Williston has used them for that purpose. We have a 300-foot section of gap sidewalk somewhere in the town. They want to fill it in. Great program because it's done quickly. So.
Are questions okay?
Oh, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. So a couple of just questions. So the percentage awarded, that's versus the requested.
Correct.
Do you track how much funding is available and how much? Yeah.
So
where you are in that.
So the Bike Ped grants, our Bike Ped funding it's not a set aside. It's formula funding. So it's the same funding that's building bridges and building roads. We flex it into the Bike Ped program, and we set a target each year based on what we receive in applications. In the last few years, we've targeted around the $4 to $5 million award range. Last year, we were supplemented with some carbon reduction funding, and that's what I didn't make a note of that. So there's no specific number that we're after.
Okay, so are all of these projects looked at in relation to each other?
Yes, as far as the way that they're awarded, correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then are you awarding all or most of the funds that you have for this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I didn't include it in this presentation, but all of our awards are available for years and years on our websites. It shows which towns are actually receiving these grants and what the amount was, what the project is, and so on. So
and they're great. I mean, there's a community that's going to have, sidewalks on, Route 30, which is a pretty
Yeah.
dangerous road, so it's wonderful in my town. And then just one other, just observation is, it looks that the 100, federal funds scoping,
Mhm.
that 100% of those are getting awarded. Do you ever like tell towns, you might want to apply for this kind, this, it seems to be,
Well, so that has a specific use, and it's, like I said, it's only through that preferred alternative, so.
okay,
And I know that this came up in discussion last time is, what resources are out there for towns when they apply for funds? Well, part of it is going to step one. Scoping efforts are done pretty simply.
okay,
Those applications are simple. They would then potentially hire a project manager, but definitely hire a design consultant that would take, and move that scoping forward effort on the behalf of the town.
okay, so those are as available
Yep,
as,
Yep.
as the others.
yep.
Okay, that's very helpful, thank you.
And then, yeah, just quickly on the top section here, bike ped. I did know that, like I said, last year we did supplement, bike ped with some carbon reduction funding. I think there's some tagged again for this next round as well. And then there's a little note that says that in one year, the small scale, we did 2 rounds of that small scale. We had a lot of money in that program that particular year, so. If there's no questions there, I'll move on to the next one.
Since we're just going program by program, I do have some questions about the
Sure.
the grant program. And I had asked a similar question to Mr. Greenwood, but we saw, and maybe it's the same answer for these local programs at the in the bike ped category, but what we heard from the state was that the costs are increasing greatly and buying power has severely decreased for materials. I'm not seeing any clear consistency with these grant programs. With either money increasing, it seems really sporadic, like it seems like a few years we've got tons of money, one year we've got way less money. I'm not seeing any clear connection between actual price of goods and the programs themselves. So my assumption is that that's just because we're getting an influx of federal money and we're putting it somewhere, or kind of what's the thought process around allocating this budget amount?
Well, it's in competition. Like I said, the bike ped fund are not set aside like some of the other ones that we see, like TA, we get that's a set aside. We have to specifically spend that on transportation alternative type projects. This bike ped funding is in competition with funding for our bridges, for our paving, so for everything else. And so it's just a fiscally constrained program that, we only have a certain amount to allocate towards these types of projects.
Do you notice that having an effect on applications? If, personally, if I'm a grants manager for a town or even an individual municipal employee looking at funding for pedestrian crossings, this to me would make me say, I don't really know what the likelihood or the amount of money I should ask for it. I guess my question would be, typically when you have such inconsistency in the value of a program, people don't know how or if they should apply for certain things. So I'm wondering if you've noticed that inconsistency or variability has had an implication for the program's uptake.
I mean, I think it's I think it's pretty steady, to be honest. And if you look at our past budgets, I mean, we're spending, I'm just going from memory here, but we're spending in the bike ped program probably on an average of $12 million. So this is awards. This is not what we're actually spending. Keep that in mind too. So this is actually, they're the culmination of like projects that build up and they sort of go out and ebbs and flows. But as you'll see later on, when we do budget presentations, the spending is actually much more than this. So because projects takes years, we're not, we're getting applications in 1 year. Those projects sort of build up. We have a queue of projects that kind of move, but our spending is typically around $10 to $12 million over the last 5 years, I would guess.
Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, you normally have 10 to 12 million allocated for this total program every year, but the uptake and money awarded is not meeting that. Like people based on your,
So we're awarding in that $4 to $5, $6 million. Let me see. I mean, so you got to add all these up. So I don't have a calculator handy, but in that program, you know, we were awarding, just for example, to take FY19 because it's the top of the list.
sure, yeah,
You know, if you go to the far, almost to the far right where it says total awarded, you know, we awarded 2.5 million in large scale. We awarded another close to 500,000 in additional funding. We awarded 300,000 or close to it in scoping projects, and then another $300,000 in state funding. So whatever that adds up to. And then over the course of these, you know, fiscal years, that has grown. And last year was, I can tell you that last year, we weren't even able to select. We had other money aside for carbon reduction that we weren't able to select projects that fit that. You know, we had, basically, we're not necessarily receiving quality projects enough to grant all of the funding. And then you'll see also what plays into this is that transportation alternatives has a bike component as well.
okay,
And you'll see that those percentages are going to jump even further as to what we're awarding
okay,
percentage wise.
okay. Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. I would just say for me personally, I think that anytime you can have consistency for our local government, that facilitates better project application and then build out. So I would certainly be, just as an individual, interested in looking at how we would set aside a specific amount for bike and ped programs, because it's something we hear from constituents constantly, is that they can't get on foot or on bike to where they need to go, at least in my district. But it sounds like you want to move on to the transportation alternatives, because that helps answer a bit of that question.
It does, I think, yeah. Yep. Okay. So transportation alternatives, and to make it even a little bit more messy, transportation alternatives, there's a statute in place that requires us to award half of the funding. I'm sorry. Half of the funding has to go to environmental litigation type projects. Half of the set aside from transportation alternatives.
Okay.
And so up until fiscal year right here, 23, the set aside for TA was around just over 2 million. It was like 2.2-ish or so. So that's what we are awarding on an annual basis. When IIJA kicked in, it jumped up to the 4.3. And that's the set aside that we have now. And then in fiscal year 24, there's a little bit of a catch-up year because of the way we make our awards and the way IIJA rolled out. In that first year, we didn't award the total amount, but we added some of that in fiscal year 24, and we also had some projects that canceled and never went anywhere. So we added some of that money back in. And so that's why you're going to see the $8.8 million awarded in fiscal year 24. And 23, we made 100%, we awarded every project that was applied for. In 24, we weren't able to quite make that, but almost 70% of the projects were awarded. So,
And if the projects don't get this money, how many of them move forward?
I mean, I don't track that. I don't know. I don't know if there's any way to find that information. I think I would sort of venture a guess that a lot of them come back to us as in the next round of applications.
How often do you see reapplication? Like what's
Quite often, yeah, I would say that's a common occurrence. And again, we space these out because there's a bike ped component within transportation alternatives. There's, you know, they have an opportunity in the summer to apply through bike ped, and if they weren't awarded a project then, they could apply to transportation alternatives. Certainly, always out, you know, making it known that we're happy to meet with communities and let them know where they fell short on their applications or whatever. And we do that quite often. So.
How do you account for the drastic change from 23 to 24 in requests? Did you just put the word out that we had more money, or did that notify towns that,
A little bit of that, but I mean, we were, I mean, generally, we were, I think that the towns were well aware of it, given, you know, like local motions, you know, advocating for, you know, bike ped type projects and things like that. And we made it very well known too, that there was gonna be some extra money.
one-time money?
So, well, in certain ways it was one time, but the IIJA stays at the, you know, 4.3 moving forward as well. So in this coming fiscal year, we'll have 4.3 million to set aside. So, but the 8 was a sort of a one-time thing, based on, like I said, that we hadn't, in 1 year, we only awarded 2.2 where we should have been by awarding 4.3. But because of our statutory requirements, we have to award these projects between January and March. But at that point, that particular year, IIJA had not actually been appropriated, so we didn't know what the amount was, so we had to go with the historical level. We did the 2.2, we caught up the following year. And again, there's some canceled projects in that 8.8 million too. You know, we made an award, they didn't move forward. If we don't spend them, we lose them. So we put them back in and re-award them to a new community.
Andy, I moved the thing and you got immediate son.
No, I like it.
Okay.
That's great.
Do you want to tell us about, oh, did you?
Just the stormwater funding, if you could just explain that a bit, that'd be great.
Yep. And so transportation alternative sort of goes back and forth between bike ped and the municipal highway stormwater program because of that environmental mitigation category. So the municipal highway stormwater mitigation program is money that we flex into the TA program under that category. And so they're really one and the same, to the point where that's where this double asterisk this past year and more than likely moving forward, the programs are going to sort of look and feel the same. We're going out as one solicitation in the fall and selecting projects both under the TA program and the MM program. Municipal highway stormwater is intended for stormwater projects, but we get a lot of salt shed projects, some culvert projects. That's the primary project types that we get applications for. And so in this fiscal year 24, what we did, we took this is also in that 8.8. So
Okay.
the $1,508,880 is baked into this 8.8 million as well.
Great.
For this program was created when the Clean Water Bill passed, and we've carried it forward since then. Again, it's funding that generally could be used anywhere else. Roads, bridges. But the agencies can continue to flex it into this program. And then we move into, just trying to scroll ahead just so I know, but these are all state funded programs. Let's see, get my bearings here, but better roads. Okay, so the top section is transportation funds. So Better Roads has both transportation funds and clean water funds in it. The top section being transportation funds. And I'll say typically, we allocate those funds towards, we call it category D, in-stream culvert type projects, is what we are using that funding for. So, typically 36 inches and larger culverts in stream on your gravel town highways is what most projects represent.
And how does that relate to standards that the state has for culvert size? One of the big pieces that we hear quite a bit about in regards to climate change is that we're going to the 100-year flood is just, that's what we should anticipate for a lot of situations. So how do you decide based on, do you just give what the town asks for? Do you say, hey, actually, we think that you might want to go with a larger culvert or a different type of culvert
A
or?
little bit of both.
Okay,
So sometimes the towns will have already had a hydraulic study done. The agency offers free hydraulic studies, so if there's a need for one, they can go to our hydraulic section and get that completed. But our awards are contingent upon them putting in a properly sized pipe based on, current standards. But again, some of these are small, 36 inches, made full width, that type of theory. Or there are towns, I feel like not too long ago, the town of Danville used a portion of one of these grants, which was only $60,000 to complete a $200,000 box culvert, which was an engineered design. So it's a little bit of everything in this program.
so it doesn't need to fully fund a project. It could be an additional to make it up to.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really helpful. And I was confused just about 1 year where there was the zero.
I think that was COVID year. I
Okay,
don't think we were, yeah, that was the year that there was no funding. And I think the town highway program represented the same thing.
go ahead, Sarah, first.
The Better Roads grants are all related to water quality, are they not?
Correct. Yeah,
So some of these could be also the culvert. You could fund it also on the structures program.
correct. So that's where you're getting to the next size up.
They can
Really.
apply.
This is intended to be sort of that smaller size. Structures goes to $200,000 of a maximum grant, and then we have federal programs beyond that are an option for town.
Do these have a maximum?
$60,000 in that particular,
So
yeah.
just smaller.
Yeah, and they're not really intended to be engineered projects. These are a lot of times, projects that municipalities are doing themselves, with their own public works, road
But
crews.
is it mainly like trying to switch the box culverts for better water quality? For instance.
Right, yeah. We don't see a lot of that. I mean, we occasionally,
And I noticed that you have on these that you, during FY 25, it was done via a formula to ensure equity and not a competitive application. Could you talk a little bit about the switch there, why you moved to that?
that's,
Should be the third. one.
yeah, so that's, yeah. Can I do the second one first?
Oh, yeah, whatever.
Just, okay, just for the logical order, okay. So then the next block down is the clean water funding component of Better Roads. And so all of that funding goes directly into MRGP related activities, municipal roads, general permit related activities. So those dollars are what we call category B projects. They're, it's your stone line ditching, bringing your crown up to proper grade, cross culvert disconnection practices, those sorts of things. So those are funds that come through the Clean Water Fund to the agency, and we award them as category B projects.
So you could also fund those in the top of our category. Just their-
We could, but we sort of have tagged that funding for those category D projects, given the need there. But, yeah. And so then the next section down that you were asking about, Senator, is clean water funds that have come to the agency for purposes of road erosion inventories under the municipal, which is a requirement under the municipal roads general permit. And when the permit was reauthorized last year, I believe it was, or maybe the year before, the methodology for the road erosion inventories was revamped. And so not all the towns, but the majority of the towns had to do a re-inventorying of their roads. And so the Clean Water Board allocated this funding for purposes of that, comes through B-Trans. And because every town is mapped at this point, and we know how many hydrologically connected road segments there are in each town, that's where the formula comes in. We had a sense of what it costs to inventory a segment, which is 328 linear feet. They go out, they look at the ditches, they look at the grade, they look at erosion. There's an app that you can hop on your phone and do it for. And so based on that, we have an average cost. And so what we did is we just broke it down. If a town had 100 segments and we knew the average cost, that's what they had sort of available to them. And so what we did is we put out and it's actually an open, it's not really an application, it's an open pool of funding that we still have funding from last year. We have more funding proposed this year through the Clean Water Board for purposes of these road inventory. So,
And just looking at the time, we have about 5 more minutes
Okay.
with Joel. So if you have any burning questions, and then you've only got, looks like 3 more sections. for
Yep.
us.
And so far right, you'll see how many road erosion inventories we've awarded. It was, when Clean Water Bill passed in 2018, which is just off this chart, but we did a lot and it sort of fizzled out, went down to 0, and then 101 last year. I expect we'll do very similar numbers this next fiscal year. So, grants and aid, again, is a clean water funded program, also a formula driven program. So every year we put out solicitations based on the available funding. We say we have $3.5 million, which is about what you'll see average. We break that out based on those road segment IDs in the hydrologically connected road mileage, and we make an initial offer to a municipality. They have the chance to accept that and participate. If they do, they send us a letter of intent. We take all the letters of intent, the towns that are participating in that particular year, we reformulate the money, send back out the final offers, which is obviously a little bit more usually, but not significantly more. So these are the average awards per year. And I know there were some questions about average costs, and so that's what this last is a breakdown of what this is, based on our work and the work that we're funding in both Better Roads and Grants and Aid. This is what we're finding is that an average cost per segment to basically bring it up to standards with the municipal road general permit is costing a town about $6,000. And I will say, I was sort of thinking of it on the way over here too, is that towns are working on their very high priority segments. They're working on the segments that have the most erosion. Assumingly they're the more costly segments as well. So they're doing, I assume, segments on their own for their own municipal funding. That it's a little bit probably easier and less expensive than that.
So do you have data on that? Do you have information about how many of them?
No, that's where I think you would have to investigate that with like DEC and how they're, because towns are required to report that work if it's covered by the MRGP, regardless of funding. So our work is reported through their portal. We work with the towns to make sure that occurs in order to reimburse them. But when towns are doing that work on their own with their own, I think they're the best source of that sort of tracking information. And then lastly, the municipal park and ride program. It's a pretty small program, but as you can see, we don't get a lot of applications. We, 6 out of 6 3 years ago, 3 out of 3 2 years ago, and 2 out of 2 last year. So.
Thank you. Okay, everyone, Senator Westman, if you had anything that wasn't covered, feel free to jump in, but we thank you so much for coming and presenting to us. And this will be on our website too, if you want to dig in. But I appreciate you taking the time to follow up on our numbers questions.
Yep. Well, thank you.
And then next up, we have Patrick Murphy, who's going to talk to us about the different EV incentives. And then we have Andrea Wright. Do you two want to present together, or how would you like to?
Patrick will present. He's got the information on PowerPoint, and these are programs that environmental policy and sustainability that I oversee would implement. So kind of just here to listen in, and Patrick's definitely our subject matter expert on this. So
Thanks, Joel.
Thank you.
He's got all the cord. Do you have a PowerPoint for us other than the one you shared, or?
Yeah, it should be posted. Come on.
Reoccurring characters. Ooh, I like this umlaut over your O, Patrick.
It's the
What is it?
father. It's called the father.
A fun.
I don't know how to find those. Keep it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's different ways of doing it.
Yeah. If I don't do that when I write to you, it's not from not caring.
You now know what it is. We're not trying to do it on the keyboard.
Still use his last name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Be casual.
In the state system, he's just a Murphy.
See that? Okay.
No.
Okay, thanks so much. Sure. Well, thank you very much. For the record, Patrick Harvey, Agency of Transportation, here today to just go through sort of where we're at with our range of incentive programs, and feel free to just ask questions as we go. This is a slide that we use to introduce our programs. Our work comes both the comprehensive energy plan as well as the climate action plans, and are specifically called out in both for the three main programs that we have in statute, which are the new plug-in vehicles, Mileage Smart, and Replace Your Ride. And then there's also programs that were authorized in session law, which are the e-bike incentive program, as well as the electrify your fleet program. So we'll focus on these today. You've seen this before, and the vehicle targets that we've modeled for meeting the reduction requirements under the Global Warming Solutions Act. So 27,000 vehicles by 2025, 126,000 by 2030. But keep in mind that those are sort of rough approximations of what we might be. If things change in a different sector, that's going to impact how many vehicles we need. And even within transportation itself, and makeup of the different vehicles, whether it's a fully electric vehicle, how it's being driven, all of that will impact whether or not we actually meet our requirements. So this is where we were as of October of last year, at about almost 17,000 vehicles. We'll have the new updated data from Q4 of last year and in the next week or so that will follow up and share with the committee. And we're almost at 10,000 battery electric vehicles, 7,000 plug-in hybrids. Of course, that's short of where we hoped to be, but the incentives are a big part of how we got here. When Vermonters have been surveyed about, what is most likely to be a barrier to adopting electric vehicles, first among those reasons is the high cost. And so the incentives work away at that. And that's sort of a strong second is the just availability of public charging infrastructure.
The public.
Yeah, so in Vermont, we estimate somewhere between 70 and 75% of folks might have access to home charging, where the majority of charging will take place. But I think for the vast majority, even of those who have charging at home, they would like to see a much improved public charging infrastructure to be able to support longer distance travel, not feel like they're going to be, stranded in different places. This is, I believe, Matt Cota shared similar chart, maybe last week, sort of what our targets would be under the Advanced Clean Cars 2 regulations, which take effect in model year 2026.
And that's a requirement of the state.
So this is what the state of Vermont adopted at the end of 2022, in alignment with California's regulations that they have had a waiver from Clean Air Act to be able to go above and beyond the federal standards for fuel efficiency. This guarantees the delivery of vehicles. It's not mandating the sale or purchase of vehicles, but it guarantees the delivery of vehicles to the state at these percentages for new vehicle registration.
Okay.
And that's an important piece because as we were in the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, vehicle availability was a real sort of restriction on the adoption that we could actually see here in the state. Vermont does fairly well relative to other states, within the United States. This was ranking that was done just in December, looked at a variety of different data, but we have consistently been first in the nation in terms of charging ports per capita. Don't have a lot of capita in our state, but
Working on.
We don't have a lot of gas.
but that so we tend to do pretty well in those rankings. But we also saw that the folks are really interested in Vermont. So they looked at kind of search engine data to see, to try and gauge whether the population is ready to make a purchase, maybe not now, but in the near future. And then registrations of battery electric vehicles are also in the sort of top tier of states. In Vermont, we have a lot of plug-in hybrid electric vehicles where it tends to make more sense in the absence of fully developed public infrastructure and in cold weather climates. That is something that can work for people here in Vermont.
And that's from tireseasy.com.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Interesting. Are they a company?
I don't believe so, but
Or not?
so this is just to give you a sense of what historically has been authorized by the legislature, and we're over $27 million dating back to the end of 2019 for all of the vehicle incentive programs. There's been a lot of movement back and forth with some of the programs. Will place your eyes as it was initially authorized, it was not. Seeing significant demand at the time it was authorized, only had up to 3,000 available for folks wanting to trade in a fossil fuel vehicle. And so because of the used vehicle market at that time, there wasn't, the great demand to be able to take advantage of that. So much of that money had been repurposed, at least at that point, to other needs and to creating the Electrify Your Fleet program and to continuing the e-bike program. For those of you not familiar with the specifics, this is just a broad summary, but we can get into detail if you have questions about it. So up to $5,000 for a fully electric vehicle. All of our incentive programs, and this is unique to Vermont, all of our incentive programs are income sensitive, with the exception of Electrify Your Fleet, which is for businesses and nonprofits and municipal governments. So, and beyond that, the highest amount of funding and has gone to folks with lower incomes. So the e-bike program has gone through several iterations that now is exclusively for households with lower incomes. Replace Your Ride is largely so for folks with lower incomes, and then Mileage Smart is for those households earning at or below 80% of area median income for the state. So,
Maybe you
Sure.
touch on this in a moment, but from my understanding, none of these programs are active because they don't have funding.
so the last two are still active.
Oh, okay.
E-bike incentive program still has funding. So as of the end of last week, I think it's about 24,000 left. Electrified fleet has over 300,000 left in it. So that's, you're talking about assistance to cities and towns. That's an area that could possibly help. But you're right. The incentive program for new PEVs and Mileage Smart or Replace Your Ride all ran out of funding the beginning of October. These programs, the largest amount of funds that went to these programs were through the 2022 transportation bill, where $12 billion went to the incentive program for new PEVs, another $3 million to Mileage Smart, and another $3 million to Replace Your Ride. And so that, when it was first authorized, was intended to sort of last roughly 3 years. But the intent, I think, was also to get the money out as quickly as possible to see the highest impact. And so we did run out of funds in October, which is obviously shy of the end of this state fiscal year. So there's a lot going on in this, but it's showing sort of how incentives have increased over time, but also how, so LI is low income, MI is moderate income. So it shows how a lot of the flexibility that the legislature gave the agency to make changes, adjust the program guidelines, resulted in more funding consistently going to households with lower incomes and more funding going to full electrification of vehicles, which is working away at our climate goals. I know here on the left side of the slide just that the leasing arrangements that have been incentivized have been increasing over the last year up to through October. This, I think, was a result of a number of different choices made by automakers in response to federal tax credits and to consumer demand. Folks not necessarily wanting to commit fully to purchasing an electric vehicle or having the means to do that, but trying first through a 2 or 3 year lease and being able to bake some of those federal tax credits into much lower monthly payments.
Yeah, I would just speak from personal experience. The reason we went with a lease versus an own was we don't make enough money to get taxes back. So we were able to do the lease, put the money towards that, and then we bought our vehicle. So
yeah,
I would say that it's probably, there's very few people I know who are low income, but then also pay taxes to the extent that they would qualify for that. So it seems like it's actually kind of a positive that we're seeing as people moving towards a lease, meaning that more people are having access to it. Is that the right way to read that?
Yeah, but so there were some changes that were made to the federal tax credits through the Inflation Reduction Act that solved for that issue of tax liability. Well, whether that remains in place is another question, but as of January 2024, households would be able to actually receive those credits at the point of sale. And that would be regardless of their, income tax liability.
Oh, that's great.
So if a vehicle qualified, then they would be able to receive, the full, in some cases up to $7,500. The other, why I think we're seeing in part a lot of leasing arrangements is because not all the vehicles qualified. So the new iteration of federal tax credits, implemented, minimum requirements for battery components and critical minerals, that, a smaller list of vehicles qualified for. The IRS interpreted, the Inflation Reduction Act as providing, as being able to, provide a lease to just a household, a consumer, as a commercial arrangement. And so it was treated as a commercial clean vehicle, which didn't have the same battery component and critical mineral requirements. And so vehicles that didn't qualify through your normal tax credit programs did through a leasing arrangement.
That's very interesting.
That's tricky right there.
So,
And I just have a question about the critical mineral component. One of the oftentimes bandied about insults or denigrations of EVs is that obviously they're using slave labor to get cobalt and lithium and all of those other things. But does that program, is the point of the critical minerals piece to make sure that you see less of those being used, or what is the purpose of that?
yeah, I think it's to be less dependent upon, a supply chain, that's particularly, managed by the Chinese government.
Oh,
So there's, a lot of the cobalt mines in, the Congo and elsewhere, majority, I think, are in the Congo are owned, by the Chinese government, and operated. So there was a desire to, sort of have more, materials generally, that were, either mined, processed, and the like, by allies rather than competitors. I think it is a valid, criticism of electric vehicles, and it has to be accounted for. But when you look at, the relative efficiencies of the gas powered vehicle that also, draws from exploitative practices across the world, the more immediate term benefits for, localized emissions and for our emissions profile, more broadly speaking, points in the direction of electrification as being a net positive for climate.
so just so I can underline your point a little bit,
Yeah.
what you're saying is that ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles, also potentially use these minerals as well?
Well, they're using fossil fuels, that have to be extracted from somewhere by someone. So, so yeah, nothing is purely clean, but, electric vehicles are significantly cleaner. So the new PV program has seen dramatic increase of the past year, and that's why we ran out of funding in October. To the point where, we began the, calendar year, at about $500,000 to $600,000 for spending on a monthly basis. And then in August and September, that just dramatically increased further, to, nearly $1 million, per month. This is showing the composition of the vehicle transactions through that program. So we sort of passed the tipping point, just over a year ago in terms of leases versus purchases. And, we're all the way up to almost 85% in September.
That is very interesting, and that's the composition of the folks who are getting incentives from the state.
That's right.
Do you have an idea if the composition of all of the EVs being purchased is similar?
It's a little harder to track. We can see what we can get you in this next batch of data that we'll send. But it is, yeah, it's a bit harder to track.
But it does make sense, just when new technology to not jump in.
That's right.
To test.
Yeah, and there's, a depreciation factor on electric vehicles. It's
The main reason we saw this was because of the incentives.
Right, that's
You could
why,
get a lease
yeah,
deal for $89 a month.
that's right. Yeah.
And so it's just once the dealers figured that out, they started advertising pretty heavily. So that's why you saw that $4 million get spent very quickly.
wow.
And then the money ran out before. I think when you started the year, you thought, oh, we have plenty of money. But then once they started advertising these leases, my
That's
son's
interesting.
friend got like, I think it was, so let's say it was $79 a month for a brand new Kia.
That's crazy. But I would just think, especially if you're looking at the environment, it's better to have them on the road sooner rather than later. And rather than save money for the end of the program.
Right. I mean, in my mind, of run incentive programs, I would say that we over incentivize them. We would rather have more incentives going out to do more electric cars. We didn't need to drop it to $59. So, but we didn't really know the manufacturer. Some of those manufacturers were going to come out with models that cheap, or and if somebody was low enough income and they could stack all the incentives, they could get a car that was, I would say, over incentivized. But it kind of happened so fast, the money was gone before they could make a change.
That's interesting.
In a different iteration, we would probably look at incentivizing leases
So
at a lower amount.
maybe have a cap on like the total cost or something.
Right.
So I would assume that overall car sales, I don't know if it's the reverse of that, but I would assume leases are a small number. Are less than 50% of cars purchased.
Yeah, I'd have to go back to some of Matt's slides.
Yeah.
But
That's an interesting question. No, are they pushing leases in general too? There was a point made earlier last week about the idea that the incentives going away wasn't the reason for people jumping to take advantage of the incentives. But that seems inaccurate based on what you just said. So
say that again.
I just want to speak to, last week we heard, and perhaps I misunderstood, so I want to be corrected if that's the case. But we heard from Mr. Coda that the October going away of the incentives was not the reason for that increase, that increase was just going to continue to happen regardless of the incentives. But what I think I'm hearing from you is that in fact, the incentives having a point that they would be going away did motivate people to take advantage of the.
I think the point he might have been making is actually similar to what Senator just said, is that there wasn't really all that much time for people to sort of react to the idea that the incentives were going away, because it did happen pretty swiftly. We didn't, it was probably late September that we then realized, it might have even been early October before we understood what the burn rate had been in September, and that we were about to close, because earlier projections had shown us getting to maybe the end of November, maybe into December. And this was all, the hope was that we'd be able to secure a federal grant to be able to continue the programs with federal money through the EPA. There was a climate pollution reduction grant that the state, Agency of Natural Resources applied on behalf of the state, try and secure, nearly 40% of that would go to transportation programs. And so a significant chunk of that, it's almost 40 million could have gone to continuing these. So that was what we were trying to do with some of the modifications that we made in the other programs to Mileage Smart, to be able to kind of cruise into the point at which we would be able to add federal funds. And it did come up on some of it. So yeah, I'm not sure that people reacted so much to the expectation that the funding would be gone as they were reacting to different sales and leasing deals that were, significant.
But I think some of them, because even if you got a flyer that said $90 a month and you went to the dealer and said the money just ran out, but it's going to be $300 a month, they would have said, well, I'll still do it or something. But so I think the advertising helps push sales even after the incentive. Because he sort of was making the point that sales were going up even without the incentives, which I don't think is good.
So I think what he was looking at is that we had an annual average, for last year, 12% of new vehicle sales were electric. That continued in November and December, but we had also seen a spike in September to above 13% and then nearly 15% in October.
And I think the dealers were doing the advertising and getting more cars because they're like, wow, this is a good deal. We're going to sell a lot of them, thinking that the money would last.
Sure. It's hard to say. There's lots of different factors that go into it. There's expectations around whether the Inflation Reduction Act credits would be in place or not. There's and what you don't see in sales data is who has the ability to purchase and who's making those purchases.
Right.
So
And are people making purchases worried about tariffs? Like that, after the election, they might.
So lots of competing factors, maybe no clear answer.
not at this point. I mean, I think a couple months of data is hard to, pull apart. So Mileage Smart was also seeing the same sort of trends. At one point in this past year, we were spending about $400,000 a month on incentives, so it had really matured. And that was a case where we had more sort of lead time, and we did, to Senator Pursley's point, we were able to modify the program and kind of direct more of the funding as we went to people even below that 80% AMI threshold, so that we were providing more of an automatic $5,000 for people that were eligible for SNAP benefits. That's a food assistance program. And we sort of paused the incentivizing of conventional hybrids for those that didn't fall into this SNAP eligibility. And we reduced the amounts that we were incentivizing on vehicles that for folks that didn't that weren't eligible for SNAP, from 5,000 to 2,500. So we maintained that 5,000 for the subgroup that we felt needed the most.
So in this chart, the total amount is the total incentive count. It's to the left.
Yeah.
The line.
Yeah.
Not the total dollar.
Yeah, the total dollar amounts on the
And it's not even the total amount, it's the annual.
right. Replace your rides. Again, we made changes in late July 2023, which increased the amounts, the maximum amounts from 3,000 to 5,000. There were a few moderate income households that took advantage of the change and were able to receive 2,500. But the vast majority of folks were households with lower incomes. And, that spike in activity really happened after the July changes. So, and we continue to see that, so that people were really using it as it was intended, to provide a much higher benefit, stacking it with one of the other programs that are my smart PPs, utility programs that are
Right.
quite significant in our state, and then with the federal tax credit options, all of that kind of allowed for a significant uptake in the usage of all of these programs.
And these cars had to be scratched. For
Yeah.
replacement.
Yeah.
So it was over 300 or 300, 400 vehicles.
That's right.
And did everybody replace it with a car? Because there were other options. Did anybody take this other
There's
option?
all the red option there at the bottom. It's a smaller amount, but
Yeah.
there were people who did opt for the mobility card. So instead of being able to take that funding and put it towards a vehicle purchase, someone could receive a prepaid debit card, essentially, that could be used only at participating businesses, which included bike retail shops. It included a variety of services like Car Share Vermont and others that, people were able to kind of get around, meet their transportation needs in a different way. So that is the cleanest way that people will be able to participate in the program. The e-bike incentive program, last year, the legislature modified it somewhat to become less a rebate, more a voucher-based system. And so we use that hex card system that was already being used for the Replace Your Ride program as a way to provide a prepaid debit card to folks to be able to go to only the businesses that were participating. So in the first iteration of the program, we allowed for online purchases, and the end result of that was that roughly 79% of purchases were made online, mostly out of state. This sort of changed that dynamic so that all of the funding remained within Vermont at local shops. We also had, over 50% in this past year for receiving a higher amount for cargo bikes, electric cargo bikes, where we thought there was more potential for greenhouse gas emissions reductions. You get more passengers on there potentially, or just the ability to make more trips with the extra cargo capacity. And then there were a significant number, I think, that took advantage of the adaptive e-bikes that come with a much higher cost than the conventional bike. And then the last program here is just the Electrify Your Fleet program. There were several municipalities that took advantage of this. Law enforcement vehicles, some electric bikes took advantage of that. I think there was at least one snowmobile, maybe a couple of snowmobiles, and an ATV was one modification maybe the past year. So there's a mix of vehicles, and we'll see what we learn from it and how best to continue it or modify it.
You did have somebody get an ATV?
Yes, yeah.
Was that a
A
speeder?
utility vehicle. Can't remember, it might have been,
Like a municipal utility? Who got
I
it?
think it might have been university, where they have some sort of utility vehicles where doesn't need a full blown pickup. truck.
Right, it's kind of like a go.
Yes. Um. And so that last part there is that it was intended to pair with the Inflation Reduction Act. So it was $2,500, and then the expectation was you go out and seek the $7,500, which one of the interesting things about the Inflation Reduction Act was that it provided tax benefits for tax exempt organizations. So municipal governments would still be able to participate, nonprofit, whether it's university or other nonprofits would also be able to get a direct pay option. That $7,500 if the vehicle itself qualifies. So that is something that, you know, it will depend on what happens with current administration and how the IRS achieves these tax credits. You know, what the success of this program would be, and then, you know, whether there's any modifications needed to make up for that in the absence of continuation of the federal program.
Thank you for this presentation.
Sure. So happy to take questions.
Yeah, we have about 5 minutes left before we're adjourning for lunch. And I know that we're about to find out some of the answers to some of the budget questions on what does this program look like in the
Sure.
upcoming governor's budget. But does anyone have any other questions for Patrick? This is really thorough, and I just want to highlight a real deep sense of appreciation for AOT taking seriously the cause of electrifying our fleets statewide, because I think we are kind of special in that regard nationally. So I really appreciate and respect that. And I appreciate having someone with such a deep well of knowledge on it as our legislative liaison. I only had one question about the staffing of Mileage Smart and Replace Your Ride.
Yeah.
But with our limited time, perhaps I'll ask you offline that stuff. Anything else? And then Andrew, did you get an opportunity to introduce yourself to the committee? I don't know if you did.
Yeah, I've met several of you before, but I'm Andrea Wright. I'm the Environmental Policy and Sustainability Manager, and we implement these programs. Great.
And we may see you again for Cap and Invest, is that right? Or you?
We have not been asked to speak about Cap Invest yet, as far as I know. But yes, we're involved with A&R on that study. We'll be presenting to the Climate Council on this next. So there's an opportunity for people to sit in on that and ask questions and do the report. Yeah, and we're back here on Thursday to talk more about the report and our current programs.
Okay.
Questions submitted to 50.
Senator Westman, we're about to go off live unless you had anything that you wanted to touch base on before we wrap for the day. Seeing none, I guess we can.